I think pretty much every graphic designer hates quoting for a job because you just never know what the client's expecting. You could send out a quote that you think is quite reasonable, and they might come back thinking it's way too high, or the complete opposite can happen, and you're sort of kicking yourself for not going in a bit higher. So the general rule and the way I do things is to work out roughly how long I think it's going to take me to do the logo design. It will vary slightly, but the more you do it, the more you'll get a feel for that. So let's say, for example, you might say that it's going to take you a day to come up with a set of ideas. Well, let's say, for example, you're going to charge £50 an hour, and that's 8 hours at £50 an hour, so that's £400. But then no doubt the client will come back with some tweaks. So you need to think, how long do you think those tweaks are going to take? So perhaps I'd allow another half day to a day for tweaks, depending on how much toing and froing I think there'll be. So that might be another £50 times 8 hours. So that would be another £400. Um, and you also need to take into account then, are you doing this just by Skype, by email, or have you actually got to go out and meet the client? Because obviously, if you're doing a lot of travelling, that's all going to rake up extra hours and extra expenses. Now, when you're putting together the quote, you might also want to consider things like safeguarding yourself against crazy amount of amends. And you can do this just by putting a line saying that the quote you've given includes minor amends, or you could say this quote includes 3 sets of client amends. Now, this doesn't mean that if they come back, say, with 4 sets of amends, that you're necessarily going to charge them. It just gives you that option should things get a little bit crazy. But obviously, if it is to get to that point, don't just charge them it. Before you do it, say, okay, I've done quite a lot of amends. Unfortunately, anything beyond this point is going to have to be an addition. Just make sure the client always knows up front what's happening. Another thing you might want to consider, depending how well you know the client, is whether to charge them an upfront deposit. Now, some designers do this, and it can be anywhere between sort of 20% and 50%. In general, I don't do it, although I have been stung a couple of times, so fortunately not very often. Um, but yeah, you can choose that as an option.